Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. The weather is turning throughout the state of Indiana, and the cool air means only one thing. Basketball season is near in America's best basketball state. Here on the podcast today, we are going to preview the 2023-2024 Purdue basketball preview episode in great detail ahead of one of the most anticipated seasons in program history. Purdue enters the year as one of the favorites to do something it's never done before, win a national championship. Today, I'll preview the Boilermakers top to bottom before looking at some of the top storylines entering the new year, and of course, as always, answering a plethora of your mailbag questions. Thank you to all of those who sent in questions for this episode. I know I'm very excited for this, and I think it pales in comparison to the way many fans feel entering this season. Real quick, if you don't already, be sure to follow the show on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. There will be plenty of conversation to be had about this team throughout the winter. You'll want to join along on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You're not going to want to miss an episode throughout this season. And if you enjoy this basketball preview episode, please send it on to a friend or two who's into the Boilermakers. It's going to be an awesome season. I'm looking forward to sharing it with you all, and of course, always welcoming new listeners onto the pod. Let's get on into this, though. This is one of the most anticipated seasons in Purdue history. This is a team that returns a lot from a year that really came out of nowhere. You know, coming into last year, I thought Purdue would be solid. I thought Purdue would outperform some of the expectations that it had coming into this season. I thought it would be a good Purdue team. I thought Purdue would make the NCAA tournament. I thought Purdue would be good. I did not see 29-6 coming. 15-5 in the Big Ten. Purdue wins the regular season crown by 3 games, wins the Big Ten tournament. It won the Phil Knight Legacy back in November against some really good competition. And of course, the season ended in very disappointing fashion with a loss in the round of 64 to 16th seeded Fairleigh Dickinson. One of the best regular seasons in program history came out of absolutely nowhere, but it also came crashing down in a historic loss that fans certainly have not forgotten anytime soon. How does Purdue bounce back from that? Well, that's the story of the season. That's been the story ever since that Friday night in Columbus, and that's the story that Purdue will be dealing with all season as it goes through what is always a grind in the Big Ten and through one of the nation's most rigorous non-conference schedules this year. Let's get into the roster a little bit here because, as I said, Purdue gets almost everything back, and you are all well aware of this. Purdue loses David Jenkins Jr. and Brandon Newman from last season's roster. Jenkins, sixth-year grad transfer, expired his eligibility, and Brandon Newman elected to transfer. He is now at Western Kentucky. Look, I don't think either of these guys is a big loss. Newman scored 6 points a game, 31% from 3. The consistency that he hoped for and so many hoped for from him, including Purdue itself, it just never came. It never quite worked out for him. And he elects to move on to a different opportunity. It's probably a good fit for both sides. Meanwhile, David Jenkins came in and played a nice role for Purdue. I don't know that he was the perfect fit for what Purdue asked him to do. He was not a point guard, really, and he was asked to be the number 2 point guard on the team. Scored a little over 3 a game, played a nice role, but I don't expect either of those guys to be big losses. When you look at this team, of course, it literally and figuratively centers around one player, and that is Zach Edey, who returns to Purdue looking to become the first back-to-back National Player of the Year since, Another big guy, Ralph Sampson, back in the early 1980s from the University of Virginia. He was the last guy to do it. There have been a lot of good players who have attempted to do it, but Zach Edey will try to be the first one to do it in nearly 40 years. Look, he scored 22 points, 13 rebounds a game last year. He was the most dominant player in college basketball. How much better can he get this year? How much can he improve? We're going to talk about that more in some questions, but everything about Purdue, again, centers around Zach Edey this year. His decision went down to the wire on whether to stay in the draft or to go pro. I think Purdue made the right decision, or I think Zach Edey made the right decision. He elected to come back. Certainly NIL a factor there. And he is going to be, as you've seen, the preseason National Player of the Year at every outlet, at every poll. Everyone is going to have Zach Edey as the preseason National Player of the Year. He's joined by a pair of seniors on this year's squad in Mason Gillis and Ethan Morton, both of which have had solid careers at Purdue in different ways. You know exactly what you're getting in Mason Gillis. He is a glue guy. He is someone who can knock down some threes. He is someone who will do some dirty work. He's physical. He can do some really good things for you. What kind of upside does he have, in terms of getting better, in terms of really improving year over year? I think that's fair to be questioned. Whereas with Ethan Morton, his career has looked a little different because you don't know exactly what you have in him. He barely played as a freshman, went through mono before the season. A weird year for everyone during the COVID season. As a sophomore, he played a very, very brief role, just kind of filling gaps wherever Purdue needed him to, and he was effective. He shot 40% from three. He played some really good defense at key moments. He was a critical part of Purdue's round of 32 victory over Texas. Last year, he slid into the starting lineup, started the vast majority of Purdue's games, did not shoot particularly well. And that is that's what it came down to. He did not look particularly comfortable on offense. He passes the ball very well. That much is known. But as a scorer, I think it's a question. What Ethan Morton as a three-point shooter does Purdue get this year? What is the reality for him? That's going to be a big question. But at bare minimum, he's a solid defender who does not turn the ball over much. I know, again, with him, the upside is fair to question, but at bare minimum, he's a fine player to have on your roster. A couple of guys in the third year in their program, in the Purdue program, Trey Kaufman-Renn and Caleb Furst, both looking for a bit of a breakout season in different ways. Caleb Furst, another guy who saw his role get expanded from year one to year two. He did some nice things for Purdue. He showed some really strong improvement on the defensive end last season, especially, showing some versatility to be able to guard both the 4 and 5. Guarding the 4 was something he really struggled with as a true freshman. Needs some consistency on the offensive end, though. He is not exactly a dynamic offensive player, but he's more than willing to get, the quote-unquote garbage points. He cuts to the basket well. He's a good offensive rebounder. He jumps well. He plays hard. He did not shoot particularly well from three-point range last year, and that's something that I think I expected him to do well. It just happens sometimes, but he did not shoot the ball well from three. How does that impact? How does that change this year? Something to watch. Will he play more of the 4 or 5 this year? Something else to watch, because Trey Kaufman-Renn is coming in after an all-around solid freshman season. He played almost exclusively the 5 last year. There are reports, very substantial reports, that Purdue is working with him at the 4 as well coming into this season. Some thought that may help Purdue on the offensive end. I'm interested to see that. He did not shoot a whole lot from 3 last year. It's something I think he's capable of doing, but he's a good low post scorer. He's crafty down there. He can get his shot up. He's a good player. How big of jumps can First and Kaufman-Renn take? That's a big one here. Speaking of jumps, you have two players looking to make the jump from freshman to sophomore season after both having very good freshman years. Braden Smith showed that he belonged right away on Purdue's roster. He was Purdue's second best player throughout last season. As you all know who have listened to this show for a while, I'm a huge fan of what he can do. I think he's the best point guard Purdue has had in some time. I think you're going to see a huge jump there. With Fletcher Loyer, he really showed an ability to take over games a bit. You look at that game at Nebraska early on last season when Purdue does not win that game without him. You look at the game at Breslin Center on Martin Luther King Day. Zach Edey was the story of that game. He had like 32 points or whatever, but Fletcher Loyer made so many winning plays down the stretch of that game. Purdue doesn't win that without him. He got tired a little bit towards the end, but he's back looking for that big jump from year one to year two. In the backcourt, you have Lance Jones transferring in from Southern Illinois. He's a guy who can really provide a versatile element both on offense and defense for Purdue this year. Purdue needs him to be able to take minutes at point guard, and Purdue needs him to be able to knock down shots on offense and initiate some offense. I think he's probably a little bit better suited for that role than David Jenkins was. I think Lance Jones has a little bit more all-around upside, whereas a lot of Jenkins' upside in his career came as a volume scorer. I think Jones has some more versatility there. Him defensively is going to be really important to watch. On the wing, you've got some really interesting options with Miles Colvin, Camden Heide, and Brian Waddell. Colvin and Heide bring some athleticism that fans have long been clamoring for to the wing spot for Purdue, but they're both freshmen. They're both in their first season playing real minutes for Purdue. Heide obviously redshirted last season, Colvin a true freshman, and Brian Waddell is now healthy after a year of not playing for Purdue a whole lot. He got some minutes early on. He contributed in the PK 85, played some late minutes in the win at Marquette, or at home against Marquette, but as a whole, he was largely not a rotation player during Big Ten play. He only got in during some of the garbage time situations more. With Waddell, he's now healthy. He was still coming back from an ACL tear last season. How those three factor into this team could go a long way in determining the absolute ceiling. Look, these are a lot of good players here, and you only get 200 minutes. We're going to talk more about the minutes crunch and how that gets divided later, but that's a very real problem for Purdue this year, but it's also an excellent problem to have. It sure as hell beats the alternative. If you have too many solid players who need minutes, you're probably going to have a pretty good team. Some questions I have for this year's team. I do wonder if it's even possible for Zach Edey to repeat as National Player of the Year. It hasn't been done since Ralph Sampson, as I said. But you see that across the board in college sports. You look at college football, where only one player has won the Heisman Trophy twice, that being Archie Griffin back in the 70s. It is very, very hard when you had an outstanding year the season before to live up to those standards the following season. It is a really big challenge. Zach Edey averaged 22 points and 13 rebounds last year. If you can go above and beyond that, you do have to almost wonder how. Because the last time I checked, there were no rule changes to the length of the game this year. There are still only 40 minutes to play. The game's not getting any longer. It's not like he's out there for longer periods of time. He played a massive volume of minutes last year for Purdue. If anything, I think Purdue may like to get him a little more rest this year. I don't know that he's going to be able to do that. And even if he does, is that enough to win him another National Player of the Year award? There aren't a ton of guys who jump off the page as clear challengers, but at this time last year, no one was talking about Edey as National Player of the Year either. Number 2 question, can Braden Smith and Fletcher Loyer become more consistent in their second year? You know, Braden Smith had a lot of really big-time moments for Purdue last year, but he did have his struggles. He did not have a great game against Fairleigh Dickinson. The games against Indiana were not his best games, especially the one at Mackey Arena. That said, he had some unbelievable games. He took over the game against Marquette. He took over the game against West Virginia. He was in complete control of that win at Minnesota when Purdue cruised to a victory, but he was dominant that day. He's an excellent player. He's going to score more this year, and that's something that's going to be interesting to see. I think Braden Smith will finish as Purdue's number 2 scorer this year. I think he's going to shoot the ball more. I think he'll probably be second on the team in shot attempts this year. He's going to be a star at Purdue, but can he kind of improve that consistency to have those, when you play a dynamic point guard role, you're going to have turnovers. It's just going to happen. But can he limit kind of the bottoming out that we saw in a few games last year? And then, next to him with Fletcher Loyer, since last season, Loyer's gotten a lot of flack. It feels like, I don't think it's completely deserved. Oftentimes we forget how big of a jump it is from going to play high school ball to college ball. That's a huge jump. Fletcher Loyer was certainly not 100% all of last year, but he still did a lot of really good things for you. And he did that without having the season from three-point range that many of us envisioned. If he can become a little bit more consistent from three-point range, and instead of shooting, 31, 32%, if he can shoot 37, 38%, that's a world of difference for this Purdue team. That would be huge. Those two are going to be very key parts of determining how good Purdue can be. The minutes crunch is fascinating to me, especially at the 2 through 4 spots. Right now, I think it's very clear. Braden Smith is going to eat up the vast majority of minutes at the 1. Lance Jones will take minutes behind him there. Zach Edey will eat up the majority of the minutes at the 5. Behind him, it's going to be Trey Kaufman-Renn or Caleb First. How Purdue lines that up from a positional perspective, that remains to be seen a little bit. I think that's a very interesting question, one that I don't have great answers to. I think you can do some inside-out stuff there that could get interesting with the two of them together. I know we talked about this coming into last season, and it didn't necessarily materialize, I think in large part because Zach Edey got so good so quick and demanded such a high volume of minutes. Again, that's going to be a thing again this year. That's not going anywhere. But how those two function could go a long way. And as they compete for minutes, it goes a long way in determining, who can play the 4. Can one of them supplant Mason Gillis as the starter? There are a lot of very real questions there. But you only have 80 minutes to play in the front court. Zach Edey's going to take 25 to 30 of them, probably closer to 30 of them every night. How do you divide the remaining 50 minutes between 3 guys? That's a huge thing to watch this year. At the 2 spot, Loyer is going to play a ton. He absolutely will. He will be the starter early on. Purdue's going to push him, though. Lance Jones is going to compete with him. Lance Jones is a really good player. I think all the reports on him have been really good, and I think he's a guy who can offer some really good attributes both on offense and defense. I don't know if you can start Jones alongside Smith and Loyer with the sole thought process of he's your number 3 guard. If one of them's in foul trouble, how do you kind of manage substitution patterns? I don't know. It's possible you could. If you just want to get your best players on the floor, he may be that answer right now. We shall see. But Jones is going to play a big role in the backcourt, And I don't wonder if we see Ethan Morton more at guard this season. If there's an area where this team does not have a ton of depth, it's at the guard spot. You have Smith, you have Lawyer, you have Jones, but then questions emerge. Ethan Morton's someone who's an able passer. He's someone who could, you could run some of the offensive sets through. He knows the game at a really high level. That's a welcomed addition. If he can knock down threes for you at a bit of a higher clip, if he can be a 35% three-point shooter, all the better. He wasn't far off from that last year after a really, really slow start. If you take out the first few weeks of the season, he was fine as a three-point shooter. He started really slow. I think he's going to slide there because I don't know, is Miles Colvin ready to play the 2 more so than the 3? I don't know. How ready is he to have the ball in his hands and make decisions in an offense like that? Something to watch. Camden Heidi's probably more of a wing. Same with Waddell. There's a lot of moving parts here. Finding rotations is not going to be easy for Purdue early on. How ready Heidi and Colvin are is a huge question. I don't know how that's going to work. They both have some really big upside. They both have some real athleticism. But keep in mind, Camden Heidi hasn't really played real games in 2 years. He missed the majority of his senior season of high school with an injury, and he redshirted last season. So he's going to be getting back into playing games, whereas Miles Colvin is making a huge jump from the level of competition he saw in high school to what he's doing now. Heritage Christian's a little bit lower level of a school in Indiana. He did play some USA basketball stuff. He got some good experience there. It's a much different style of basketball than what Big Ten play looks like. It's very different from the 4-month grind of the Big Ten. But those two are going to be fascinating to watch because Brian Waddell is right on their heels. I have a feeling Waddell is going to be really tough to keep off the floor. Everything that's been reported on him so far sounds really, really solid. He can be that guy who's very fundamental, who, we didn't see him shoot much last year. If he can shoot well from the outside, facilitate well, there's room for those guys on the floor when you have a dominant big man in Zach Edey and a really dynamic guard in Braden Smith. I'm interested at the 4 spot too. Mason Gillis has all the experience in the world. Who gives you the most upside there? That's a question that Purdue's asking itself. You need offense there. Trey Kaufman-Renn is probably the best offensive option, but how well does he mix with Zach Edey? How well do they play together? I don't know. That's what some of these early season games are going to be about. I think you'll see First play the 5 a little bit more. I think he's versatile enough to defend that well. Purdue needs him to shoot better from outside, though. There are a lot of really, really interesting questions about this team. What's Purdue's defensive ceiling? Purdue has not been the defense lives here program over the last few years that it once was. Now, for a long time, Purdue was very much defense over offense. That's changed a bit. The rule changes have changed things in terms of how you can play defense, in terms of physicality. The emphasis on the three-point ball. Purdue's been very active in analytics over the years, determining the best shot. And Purdue's had one of the best, most efficient offenses in the nation for the better part of a decade now. But how well Purdue can defend is going to be key to watch. Purdue defended fairly well last year. Let's pull up the old KenPom machine and see where Purdue finished on the defensive end last year. Purdue finished 24th in the country. That's pretty good. That's a lot better than it was the year prior, the 2 years prior, when it was not as good defensively. But how high Purdue can get is going to be interesting to watch. Purdue's very good on the offensive end. Purdue's been solid on the defensive end. I think Purdue's going to try to force some more turnovers. I don't think they're going to go crazy applying pressure to do so. I think being a little more active will help with that. Zach Edey's a really good post defender. He changes the game down there with his shot blocking ability. However, there's only so much you can do with a guy that big when it comes to ball screen defense. Purdue does a pretty good job of forcing teams into shooting contested jump shots. I think that's going to stay. I don't think Purdue's going to overhaul its defensive philosophy because it was a solid defensive team last year. But the ceiling on the defense this year, that's going to go a long way. And finally, I think the most important question is, can Purdue bounce back after what was an overall poor shooting season? Purdue was under 33% as a team last year from three-point range, and it has some guys who are good shooters. Fletcher Loyer's a good shooter. Mason Gillis has shown the ability to be a good shooter. Braden Smith's a good shooter. Lance Jones has had some good shot-making ability in his career. What do those freshmen give you? Caleb First was a good shooter as a freshman. A lot of these guys can shoot the basketball, long story short, but it just didn't really work for Purdue last year. Purdue's going to need to shoot better. That's why Purdue lost in the NCAA tournament. It went 5 of 26. When you look at the games Purdue lost, it was often because Purdue did not shoot very well. It's not rocket science. How well Purdue can bounce back? Can Purdue become a better shooting team this year? That's going to go a long way in determining whether Purdue can ultimately reach a Final Four or not. Getting into some thoughts here, the schedule is absolutely loaded. Purdue is not backing down from anyone. That has not been Purdue's MO ever under Matt Painter, really. Purdue's always been pretty aggressive on the scheduling front, but this year is a whole new story. Purdue gets Xavier in the Gavitt games, a team that I believe made the second weekend last year. You've got the Maui Invitational. It's absolutely loaded. You're going to start with Gonzaga, then either play Tennessee or Syracuse. Tennessee's a preseason top 15 team. Syracuse, not so much. And then in that third game, you could get a number of really good teams, including, hypothetically, if you make it to the championship, you would get preseason number 1 Kansas. Up in Toronto, Purdue plays Alabama in what should be a really cool experience for Zach Edey. And then the following weekend, it gets a top 10 team, I believe top 10 team, Arizona in Indianapolis at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. That's a lot. That could be 6 really high-level opponents that Purdue plays in the non-conference. Purdue has not lost a non-conference game over the last 2 years. It's gone unbeaten in non-conference both years. I highly doubt that happens again. The numbers would just tell you that it's very unlikely, but it's possible. If Purdue could do that, oh my goodness, it would be absolutely insane. That would just be wild. I don't know. I don't know that Purdue. I think Purdue's going to have a really strong record again this year. Whether it can enter the NCAA tournament with just 5 losses, that's a big ask. KenPom has Purdue at number 1 in the country preseason, but based off his, implied odds of winning every game, he has Purdue at 22-7. So that tells you how loaded up the schedule is. And of course, that only includes 1 game in Maui. But if Purdue can do that, if Purdue can enter the NCAA tournament with just 5 losses, it will have navigated a really, really tough schedule. As I said, Purdue's preseason number 1 at KenPom. In the AP poll, though, that most folks reference for rankings, Purdue's preseason number 3. This is a level of preseason expectation that Purdue has seldom seen in recent memory. It has not happened much. Purdue's had some teams that have been projected to be very good. I don't know that Purdue started in the top 5 in some time. Admittedly, I didn't look at the media guide yet, but I don't know when the last time is Purdue started in the top 5. Across the Big Ten this year, I don't know what to expect from really anyone besides Michigan State. Michigan State's going to be really good, but it's also a team that lost 15 games last year. It's got a lot of guards, some good guards. Besides that, I don't know. We'll see. Michigan State will be good. It's a preseason top 5 team. Outside of Purdue and Michigan State, I think the conference is a big old question mark, as I think for the most part in the transfer portal era will be the case. I think that's going to be the rule rather than the exception moving forward. I wanted to close before I get into the mailbag with this. We've got a lot of good questions. I'm excited to answer them. Probably got 15, 20 more minutes to go here. But this season could be very miserable for a lot of fans if they let it become that. That is no secret that after 3 straight years where Purdue's lost to a double-digit seed, the pressure on this team to make the Final Four is immense. However, no matter how hard anyone tries, no matter what anyone does, the NCAA tournament will not get here until mid-March. The season starts on November 6th officially. The NCAA tournament does not start until mid-March. There are 4 months of basketball to play before the NCAA tournament gets here. Every win is going to be met with, well, all right, but let's see it in the NCAA tournament. By some fans. That's not everybody. I don't want to generalize. Whereas a lot of that same subsect, if Purdue loses a game, will say, well, that's it. That's why Purdue can't do it in the NCAA tournament. It's never going to happen. The program's ruined. I get it. It's going to be a long season for some folks. It's going to be even harder for the team to weather that than the fans, though. It is very hard for players to not feel the external noise. I know that's something that every coach likes to say, every player likes to say, that they tune out the noise, yada, yada. Yeah, we know that's a load of it. It's not real. These guys live lives. In the social media era, in the NIL era especially, it is impossible for these guys to not feel the pressure. I'm not one of those people that really believes that the only thing that matters is the NCAA tournament, but there are a lot of people there. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on these guys all season to get there, but also to dominate in the regular season. That's something that's not going to be easy to handle. 2 years ago, we saw that with Purdue. We saw a Purdue team get hot early on. It had high expectations, but they didn't reach this type of level until Purdue went up to Mohegan Sun and beat North Carolina and Villanova on back-to-back days. At that point, it got to this level, and that team did not handle it well at all. These are 2 very different teams we're discussing here. I think this team is a little bit more mature than that group was from an emotional standpoint, but it's still going to be hard on them. The togetherness, the focus is going to be tested every single time Purdue plays a close game. And every single time, you feel the crowd get a little bit anxious during a close game, the players are going to feel that. It's going to be really interesting to see how Purdue handles some of that, because it's not all that easy at a program that's done it more in recent years, but historically has never been the one with the target on its back per se. Let's get into the Q&A here. I got a lot of great questions. Throughout the season, you've got 2 ways of sending me questions. I'm all in. Any episodes, send them over. You can tweet them to me or DM them to me on Twitter at BoilersBeyond, or you can email the show, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Sip of water there, and we are good to go. There are 11 solid players vying for playing time. How do you think Matt Painter will manage this? Well, Matt Painter is always a good quote, but one of his favorite things to say is that players will determine the playing time based on their performance. And that's very real here. Purdue is going to play the guys that give it the best chance to win. I think it's going to be interesting to see how some of the younger guys look early on, how Camden Heide and Miles Colvin look early on in the season. That's a big question for Purdue. It's a very big question if they're ready to go from day one and play at a high level. One of the hard parts here is that Purdue's got two guys who are going to require a really heavy workload in Smith and Edey. Smith is kind of your only true point guard. Edey's the National Player of the Year. So those guys command a lot. Early on, Purdue will play a big rotation in the non-conference. It'll probably tighten as the season goes on. That's how it goes every year. The big question to me is how ready Camden Heide and Miles Colvin are, though. If those guys are ready to make a big difference, then some really, really difficult decisions have to get made in terms of returning players not getting as many minutes. That's why Matt Painter makes a lot of money to do this. It's not going to be easy to do, but ultimately, it's going to work itself out. It always does. Next question. If your life depended on it, would you take Edey to go back-to-back as National Player of the Year or someone else to win it? And if so, who? If the question here is solely Edey against the field, then I'm taking the field. As I said earlier, I think it's a lot to ask of Zach Edey to repeat that performance without the game getting any longer. And to improve on it, well, there's only so far up you can realistically go. But if you were to ask me to name someone, I don't know. I mean, is Hunter Dickinson a National Player of the Year? Is Armando Bacot a National Player of the Year? Is that guard from Marquette a National Player of the Year? I don't know. Probably not. But someone always comes out of nowhere. Think back to like Obi Toppin a few years ago or Luka Garza when he won it. Sometimes just comes out of nowhere, really. A very blunt one here. All Big Ten first team or second team this year for Braden Smith? I know this guy who asked the question. He knows how big of a fan of Braden Smith I am. Look, I think it's very, very realistic that Braden Smith's an all Big Ten guard. I'd go second team right now, but if you made me fill out a preseason ballot, I would have Braden Smith as a second team all conference guard. I absolutely believe in what he can do. That is a boat I will go down on. I am very, very high on Braden Smith. One about his backcourt battery mate. Will Fletcher Lawyer better handle the physical play and improve his D to be a more complete player? Yeah, I think that's a reasonable conclusion to make. I think he's certainly probably gotten stronger and more conditioned for the grind of a Big Ten season. I think he's probably more ready for that than he was last year, having gone through it and having gone through a whole summer of preparing for it. I don't know if he will ever be an elite defender. I don't know if that's necessarily his game. I don't think he'll be, a no-gel Eastern or a Chris Kramer on defense, but I do think he can improve there and be a fine defender. In terms of physical play, the classic message board as Fletcher Lawyer, not looking like a bodybuilder. I mean, maybe that's just not his body. I don't know. These guys work out. These guys put a lot of protein in them. They're getting stronger. Whether it, always looks like it in muscle or not, maybe he's just not a guy who can put it on, but I can assure you Purdue's trying. I think he's going to take a step forward this year, though. I don't know that he's ever going to be that physical, gritty guard necessarily, but that's not really his role anyways. One here, why doesn't Purdue develop a press? Purdue has a super deep bench, so it has fouls to give and doesn't have to worry about players getting tired. Have it as a tool in the toolbox if you get in a game where you are down and need to change the dynamic of the game. Yeah, I mean, Purdue's not really deep in the right spots to press much, if you ask me. If you're going to do that, your depth needs to be at guard. And Purdue's not deep at guard. It just isn't. Purdue has like 4 guys, maybe 5 tops that you can really play in the backcourt at the 1 and 2 spot. I don't know that that's really Purdue's MO. When you press, you can only press for so long. I don't know that you can do that as like, your Nolan Richardson 40 minutes of hell type deal. I don't know that you can do that. Will Purdue throw on a press if it's down late in the game? I'm sure it will. Zach Edey also is a guy who's probably not very conducive to the press. For as great of a player as he is, I don't really know what you do with him in a press situation. That could get awkward. I don't know that that's really Purdue's deal. I think the lack of depth at guard makes it difficult. And also, I think sometimes you want to assert yourself on the opponent. You want to be the one who sets the tone, not necessarily let the opponent set the tone and force you to react. And on the related note, of course, on the other side of it is Purdue's breaking the press, the topic that comes around every year, about how Purdue, when it gets across half court, it gets the ball back to the point guard to initiate the offense. The question is, the other teams seem to know this, and they smothered the point guard after Purdue got across half court, resulting in steals. Am I wrong about this? I mean, not really. Purdue's offense initiates through the point guard spot. That's no secret. I think as guys get more comfortable, as Fletcher Lawyer gets more comfortable, maybe if Lance Jones is a better guy to initiate offense, you can take some of that off Smith, but you want the ball in Braden Smith's hands. He's a really good passer. He's a playmaker. I'd have to go back and watch more tape. I mean, that sounds right that Purdue's always trying to get it into his hands, but I think Purdue, will probably, at times struggle with the press again this year, because every team does. It's a press for a reason. Teams do it when they're desperate. Purdue doesn't tend to lose a lot of games because of the press. Games just get a little more interesting, but that's why you do it. Teams do it when they get desperate. So we'll see. That'll be something that certainly will be a conversation piece this year. Is Matt Painter's job on the line if he doesn't take this team to the Final Four? No. Next. Will Matt Painter win Coach of the Year, or will they once again give it to the coach of the most surprising team? I doubt it. This always tends to go to the surprise coach. Last year it was ridiculous that it went to Chris Collins, but so be it. The one thing that I always come back to on this is the anecdote that Matt Norlander and Gary Parrish discuss on the Eye on College Basketball podcast a lot. And that is that Billy Donovan won 2 national titles at Florida before he ever won an SEC Coach of the Year award. That tells you what you need to know about these awards for the most part. They do not tend to go to the coach who had the most impressive team. They tend to go to that little plunky overachiever. That's fine. I mean, it doesn't really matter. I feel like Tom Izzo doesn't really win that thing ever either, and he's had some great teams. So it is what it is, but I would guess someone else wins Big Ten Coach of the Year. And then 2 big picture ones here. When will Purdue fans as a whole appreciate what this team has done even without making a Final Four? And on the second piece, when will Matt Painter's legacy start to become doing less with more than for the good he's actually done? Listener doesn't think we're there yet, but he's curious. To start with the first one, when will Purdue fans appreciate what Purdue has done? When it makes a Final Four. When Purdue makes a Final Four, the entire narrative around the program will shift. And if Purdue could win a national title, everything changes. Absolutely everything changes in terms of the attitude, when in reality, nothing changes. Purdue still recruits, Purdue still plays 31 games, and then goes off and plays in the postseason. But everything would change in terms of how fans view the program if Purdue can make a Final Four. And on the second piece, when would Painter's legacy start to become about doing less with more? I think it depends how you view that question, that phrase, less with more. I can count on one hand the number of really elite recruits that Matt Painter has brought to Purdue. Purdue's not a school that really recruits that elite level of player. Purdue's gotten some good ones. You look at Etwan Moore, Caleb Swanigan, Jaden Ivey. Ivey wasn't as big of a recruit, but Caleb Swanigan, Etwan Moore. In the upcoming class, Cannon Catchings is a very, very highly regarded player. But Purdue's not had a ton of that. Purdue's a little bit more of a developmental program, shall we say. Purdue's had some very good teams in that time, but I struggle with the idea that it's less with more. I think the NCAA tournament is a bit of a fickle result that after 43 years of not making the Final Four, Purdue's had some struggles there. Purdue doesn't have the elite level athlete. Purdue's not had the, elite level consistent play to get there. The closest Purdue got recently was riding a red hot guard. Can Purdue get, is that the only way to do it? I don't think so. I think UConn just won with some very good big man play. But does Purdue do less with more? I struggle with that idea. I do think, though, that until Matt Painter makes a Final Four, just like his predecessor, Gene Cady, the conversation around him will come with the caveat, but he hasn't made a Final Four. And then finally, in the 2021-22 season, the expectations were so high that the wins didn't feel like wins. Rather, they felt like a relief. And the listener notes that I've discussed this in the past. How do fans counter the team's extremely high expectations and enjoy the victories? Live in the moment. That's probably more of a life, random philosophical thing than you came to this podcast for. But look, enjoy what you have while you have it. The Maui Invitational is going to be the Monday through Wednesday before Thanksgiving this year. Enjoy it. That's a great week of basketball. It's unreal. That's one of the best weeks of the year. You have great college basketball all week leading into rivalry weekend of football. Enjoy that and enjoy time with your family. That time with family is going to be there whether Purdue wins or loses out in Maui. Enjoy that. Enjoy what there is of the Big Ten season. Focus on the Big Ten race. Don't always look at bracketology every day, 5 times a day. I know a lot of folks only care about what happens in the NCAA tournament, but just enjoy the process. Purdue has some players that are very easy to root for. Purdue has Zach Edey, who's as fun to watch as anyone. Purdue has a great home court atmosphere. For those of you who are going to games, soak it in and enjoy it. It's going to be a lot of fun this year. There's going to be a lot of fun to be had. Yes, there is going to be that cloud hanging over Purdue's head all season until that Sunday in March comes and Purdue finds out where it's going. But until then, take it a game at a time. Try not to get too caught up in the big picture and enjoy it, because right now, Purdue is in the best spot it's ever been as a program, at least in the modern era. If you want to go back to the Rick Mount years, okay. But this is a great time for Purdue basketball. The program has been probably the best program in the Big Ten over the last decade, or 8 or 9 years. I guess we're still in the last decade since that god-awful 2-year stretch. But Purdue's been really fun. Purdue's been really good. It's a great time to be a Purdue fan. And, if you want to just sit and wait for March all year, that's fine. You can do that. But I don't know that that's exactly fun. And at the end of the day, this is entertainment. It's supposed to be about fun. And that's what this podcast is supposed to be about. So, after rambling for 49 minutes, that is all I have for this year's preseason preview episode. Thank you all for spending time with me. Thank you for listening throughout this entire deal. It's going to be a fun season. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you don't miss anything throughout the year. I will be back here. I guess this is being recorded a little early, so I'll be back here later this week to talk about Purdue's game at Nebraska coming off a bye week. Yes, it's still football season. I'll be talking about football all the way through the bucket game. And if there's a bowl, we'll talk about it into a bowl. I'll be talking about basketball all throughout November. I'll have my eye on Purdue's scrimmage against Arkansas. And once the games get going, we'll be talking about them all here. So be sure to follow on Twitter at Boilers Beyond. And if you enjoyed this show today, please share it with some fellow Purdue friends. If you enjoyed it, I hope they would enjoy it too. But thank you again for listening. I appreciate all of you. Enjoy this season of Boilermaker basketball. Take care.